Hi, I'm Ernie.
And I'm Ben.
And this is Budget Nerds.
What was all in your mind?
You are not alone.
No, you are not. Friends, welcome back to another episode. Excited about this one. We are talking about YNAB Together. So YNAB Together is a new feature that we just released. And the whole hope of this feature is to improve your relationships, those relationships with the close-knit people in your lives where money is involved. And so Ben and I thought it would be great if we went through some different folks that you may want to share a budget with and just how this feature can enhance those relationships.
Yes, I guess we should dig in first just a little bit more about what YNAB Together is. Like Ernie said, it's a new feature, and it's really a hub. It's a place in your settings where you can go and you can invite people to join a group under one subscription. So you can actually have multiple users in your YNAB subscription, up to 6. So you have the group manager, and then you have 5 members. And all the members can have their own budgets. They can share budgets with each other. You have like a whole permission system where some people can see certain budgets, other people can't see other budgets. So it's just a way to share a YNAB subscription with close-knit groups. We're thinking families, partners, any kind of group of people that's close-knit enough to share some financial information. And you could do it all for the price of one subscription, which is really great. We actually have a haiku that the team wrote, which I think is just perfect. It just describes the kind of relationships that we are looking for, that this feature is really designed for. And it says, so YNAB Together is for a relationship with heart, also one in which money plays a part. There you go. And I think it's great.
Here we go.
Because it's a haiku that also rhymes, which is pretty fancy, I think. So if you have a close-knit group of people that you want to bring in, it's usually going to be your partner, maybe your teenagers, a caregiver. We'll talk about that a little bit. You can bring them in to share budgets and share information, and it really can make things a lot easier. And like Ernie said, improve your relationships around money.
Yeah, and I'm excited to get into how it actually is making things easier and strengthening those relationships, because up until this point, to share a budget, you would share your individual login credentials with your partner or with your teen. How is all of a sudden them having their own logins changing the game? So we're going to get into that. Why don't we start by talking about partners?
Yeah, so partners is one of the groups of people we had in mind when we were designing YNAB Together. And it's really one of the most obvious use cases for this. You're using YNAB, you are doing money with a partner, and you might want to invite them into YNAB so you can share budgets. And it's really great because you don't have to share login information, that your partner can have their own separate login and they can come into YNAB. And you can choose to share whatever budget files you want. They could have their own budget. You could have separate budgets, however many budgets you like, but you can also kind of share permissions on who can see what, which is really great.
And then each partner can choose whether or not they use 2FA, two-factor authentication, on their login. So that's awesome.
So much more secure.
That's a huge step forward. Yes.
Now, I think one thing, when we did this in beta, we had we got a pretty big group for beta testing for this, because it's such a huge burn down of how the whole backend is structured. So a lot of work went into this, and we did a lot of testing on it before we released it. One thing that we found was really emotionally powerful. I think it was more than we expected. A lot of partners never really felt like they were really a part of the budgeting process until they got this official invite from their partner. It just kind of felt like it was, I guess it's just more intentional. It's like you're actually using a feature to say, hey, I want you to be a part of this, right? And you're going to have your own login.
I thought that was super interesting. Maybe if you share that login, it's like, oh, this is your own nerdy habit, right? And the other partner is just like, well, I'll just kind of let you do your thing, whatever. And sure, I'll sign in every so often if that makes you happy. But hey, here's an actual invite, right? Set up your own login. I want you to be a part of this nerdy hobby that I have. I can see how that would make a big difference.
Yeah. And I was surprised by that because it's not really my experience with Caitlin, with my wife, because we share logins for all sorts of things. Like we have the same Amazon Prime account, like same same thing all the time. And we have like a shared password manager that we use for a long time, so sharing passwords is a pretty common thing for us. But for a lot of people, they keep more of those things separate. And so without like an actual login, it was kind of hard to facilitate some of these partners doing YNAB together. And we actually even have a lot of examples of partners having separate YNAB accounts too. And a lot of those people choose to bring them together so they could, they don't have to pay for two separate subscriptions necessarily, which is huge. But then we have even more examples of a partner who just wasn't really involved at all. And because they got this invite, they kind of come in and they can be a little more a part of it and start their own personal budget if they want to and all that. So it's pretty exciting. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Christy and I are similar to you and Caitlin. We share a lot of login. And I think actually I was part of the beta testing for YNAB Together. I think it had the opposite effect where I invited Christy and that invite just sat there.
Same.
Ignored.
Yeah, I wanted to try it
finally
out.
I'm like, okay, Christy, can you accept that? And we set this thing up. I want to test this for the team. So.
Yeah, I had to do the same thing. I'd be like, hey, can you, because I think the invite's only good for 14 days or something, and then you have to send it again. So I think I had to send mine again.
And it was the same way with my teens. I sent it to two of them, and they just ignored it. So I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
All right, but that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. Some people already have like a workflow going, and so it works. So you don't necessarily have to use it. But I think it's really powerful too. Also, this is a little bit harder to talk about, but YNAB Together for partners also kind of helps facilitate separating if they need to. This is a big thing we had to talk about. Like, who owns what budget file when they part ways? Because it does happen, right?
Yep.
How do you handle that? How do you handle DI connections? All of that's been thought through. So, every person can own a budget file, and that person has control over who in their group sees that budget file. And then when they leave the group for whatever reason, they can take that budget file with them and automatically start a 34-day trial with their own YNAB account. And so nothing is lost then, because the worst thing you'd want is like, you're like in a relationship, you're like, okay, who gets the house, who gets the kids, who gets the YNAB subscription, right? you can actually like leave that relationship, leave that group, and take your budget with you, which is really important. So there's a lot there.
Now, some of you might be newer to YNAB and you're wondering, okay, how do you actually set up a budget with a partner? We talked about this, Ben and I. This was way back in early 2021. And so we're going to link to that video right now above, talking through just the how-tos of budgeting with a partner. So be sure to check that out. And we'll also put a link to help doc in the description here.
Yeah. There's a lot. There's so many different scenarios. There's some partners who share everything. All the accounts are joint, and that's how it is with me and my wife. Some do totally separate. Some do a mix of both. In fact, I feel like that's probably the most common, is there's a bit of a mix of both. So there's a lot of different ways to set up YNAB there. So yeah, if you want to dig in, check out that help doc. It really goes over a lot there.
So we've mentioned this probably a few times here, but the whole purpose here, again, YNAB Together, it's to have a happier, healthier relationship, right? Maybe you have 99 problems, but let's not have money be one of them. And so, nice, you can get on that.
I'm not just going to let that slide. That was nice, Ernie. I love it.
I'm actually really surprised I was able to think of something on the fly like love that. It. That's unlike me. But it gives you this shared framework from which you can make these decisions. Now, I was doing a budgeting with a partner live Q&A the other night, and I had an interesting question come up. And there were a couple people that the question resonated with in the group. And they were asking about, well, how does this work, or what does it look like when one of the partners makes significantly more or less? They're basically asking, like, how can you still have this shared framework for decision making when there's that discrepancy in pay? And you mentioned this is something that you've dealt with in the past, and I thought it'd be great if you just shared your thoughts on that.
Oh yeah, I mean, we're a little closer now in what we make, but early in my career, I was a library worker, which meant I made like nothing. I wasn't even a librarian. I was a library worker. I didn't have the degree, and so yeah. In fact, I don't even know if I should tell this story, but
do it.
I had an interaction with an older coworker when I was working at the library that was a little weird. I think about it sometimes. It was a little weird. Some different values going on. So yeah, so he asked me what my wife did, and I was like, oh, she's a web developer and a software developer. And he was like, oh, so she makes a lot more money than you do. And I was like, yeah, she does, like a lot more. And he was like, well, that's kind of sad. And I wish I had like the wherewithal in the moment. I think I just kind of stammered and was like, I was like so shocked because it was just like, I think he thinks that's how it shouldn't be, but I'm like, yeah, I want, what I wish I had said at the moment is like, it's not sad at all. I want my wife to make as much money as possible. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's not sad at all because I'm not sure I'd be functioning too well without her. So anyways, it was a weird interaction. I think about it a lot. But yeah, it can be tricky. Like when, one partner makes a lot more than the other. For my wife and I, like I said, we have joint finances. So even then we just considered everything that came in that we made to be joint money, and it's just kind of the way we thought about it going into marriage and everything too. So it wasn't like a super big problem or anything that we dealt with. It was just kind of we just talked about all the money as if it was something we both made, so but I know for some people, especially if maybe you get married a little older. I was super young when I got married, so we were both kind of starting our careers right when we got married. But maybe if you've been independent for a long time and you come together with someone, it can be a little tricky when you have kind of this big disparity in incomes. So that's something we could talk about a little more too.
Yeah. And I know for me and Christy, it was the same situation where she was making more than me for a good amount of time. Okay. And she really liked that, because I was the one taking care of all the finances, and she's like, yeah, I'm really driving this thing.
Okay.
But then she took a reduction in hours, went down from 40 to 30. And so then, I surpassed her. But we've always, we started with joint finances. And so, yeah, there was always this understanding that, your money is my money, or all their money is, our money kind of thing. So I think it starts with a discussion.
Yeah.
And then what the decision comes from really, it doesn't matter. There's a number of different ways that you can successfully handle those situations. I know there's some couples where they just pay for more of those shared expenses. The partner that earns more has a bigger responsibility, and the others, they just decide to go 50-50 on those.
Yeah, I've talked with a lot of people who do it lots of different ways. If you don't have totally combined finances, then you want to be able to make decisions about your personal incomes if you want to do it that way. Some people do it like you said, Ernie, like they say, oh, well, we just do like a percentage. So like the house payment, if this person makes 60% of the income and this person makes 40, then we do 60% of the house payment is, they just kind of proportion it, like that. But I've also talked with other people who they just keep it, they still have the same amount. And one person has more discretionary money for themselves as an individual than the other. And I think that's totally fine too. It's really, what's important is that you talk about it and you make a decision together.
And I know one thing that I've tried to do is be very intentional when situations come up where it's pretty evident that, maybe I'm bringing more money to the table, and I'll just use the profit sharing as an example. So Christy doesn't get much of a bonus or profit sharing, and we do.
Mm-hmm.
And so anytime we get those, I try to, or I do, and I think I've successfully done this with her, and she listens to these. Maybe she'll correct me if I'm wrong, but hey, here's our profit share, the profit sharing amount that I just got. What do we want to do? So try to include her in that extra money, like how much money do you want for Ridge, our new dog, or, how much money do you think we each get for personal, or is there something that you want to do with this in the coming months? Just include her in those decisions.
Yeah, I feel the same way about it. Like it's really just we actually last night we literally sat down and decided where that money was going to go, and Caitlin got some for some of her priorities. I got some for some of my priorities. We also did some shared stuff too. So yeah, for me it was really just it's really just just consider it both of yours. Now, I feel like you kind of have to do a little bit of a Jedi mind trick to make that happen, though, because like there is always that like, well, yeah, but also this is my paycheck. Like it has my name on it, right? And so I think there is that kind of in the background, and sometimes you have to make a conscious choice to be like, actually, I'm not going to think of it that way, assuming that's the way that you want to do it. Like this isn't a moral thing.
Sure.
Like you can make a different decision, and you could have more separate finances, and I could consider my bonus just mine, and I could do what I want with it. So long as I was covering all our shared expenses, right? But it's just not the way my wife and I do it.
Well, let's move on. I think we tackled the partner section pretty well there. Let's move on and talk about teens. That's another group that YNAB Together is intended for. So, mom and dad, parents, caregivers, they have their shared budgets. Let's get the teens involved now. They can have their own shared budgets as well.
Yeah, this has been such a hugely requested feature. This is one of the biggest reasons why we did this, because a lot of parents have realized how powerful budgeting is in their lives, and they're like, I got to get my kids doing this, because the earlier you can get them learning all these budgeting principles and habits, the better off they're going to be, right? And so it's totally natural. But the problem is, you might not want your kiddos, your teenagers to see your budget, right? And so a lot of folks they're like, can you have like a password protection on the budget file? Or, lots of ideas have been thrown out there over the years. But I think we've settled on something that's even better than like a password protection, because, well, for a lot of reasons, the teenagers can come in and they can have their own budget. Their parents can see their budget. They can guide them while they're learning, but they can't see their parents' budget unless their parents give them specific permission to do that. So I think it can be really powerful.
Yeah. And then the cool thing too is when that teen has their new budget, once they leave the house, go off to college, graduate, whatever they decide to do, right? They can take that budget into their own YNAB subscription.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. Just like I said, if the partners need to split up, well, teenagers, you hope that happens, right? That's the plan.
Please,
right? Right? Eventually, they're gonna go and they're gonna become more and more independent, and I could see that almost kind of becoming a rite of passage. Like, I remember the day when I asked my dad to take himself off my checking account. Like I was in the middle of college, and I was like, Dad, I think I'm ready to like, for you to not have like oversight over this, and he was like, yeah, you're absolutely right. And that was like kind of a moment in our relationship, where he didn't need to be checking up on me because I could handle my money on my own, and also kind of corresponded with him, giving me less support as I became more independent. So yeah, that's huge. I think that could be kind of a moment of saying, hey, go off and be your own person. You get your own YNAB subscription now, right?
This rite of passage, totally.
Yeah, and the moment you'll know when it's time to do that is the moment when, that teenager, I guess they're really becoming an adult at that point, and they realize, I don't want my parents to have visibility into my budget. It's time to put up this boundary because I'm becoming more independent. And so it's really
or
natural
I just
to do
don't
that.
need my parents, my caregivers to pay for my subscription anymore, right?
Yeah,
Like I
that
can
too.
do that myself.
Yeah.
Now, like I mentioned, I tried this with two of my boys. I invited them to our shared budget so they could create their own. Neither of them set anything up. So then with the
Okay.
youngest, I went in and I'm like, okay, I think the youngest would enjoy this. So I set up his own budget and absolutely nothing. Like I don't even think he's gone into it. So
So
I'm
not
like,
quite there yet.
okay, that doesn't work. So they still like just using their one spending category
Okay.
that they have in our shared budget. And so they just routinely ask me, Dad, what do I have available in my fun category? And they make decisions based on that. And I think that's okay. Like the time will come where, okay, maybe it's the first job or actually leaving the house where they want to set up something more official.
Yeah. The time will definitely come, and every teenager is going to be a little different on the timeline there, and that's just fine. So, yeah, it's super interesting, but it's really exciting. I think we've been talking about this a lot in the community, and I hear a lot of people talking about partners, but I feel like I almost see even more people talking about this, about bringing their teenagers on. So, absolutely huge. The third group of people that YNAB Together is really aimed at are caregivers, and this is interesting because it's not a group of people that I would immediately think of, but I'm really glad we designed it for this too, because it's absolutely huge, and it's only going to become more and more. Probably the quintessential example is taking care of like an elderly parent's finances, right? Your parents get older and they just need some help running their day-to-day finances. It kind of almost goes the opposite, right? Like, you're dependent on your parents for everything when you're a little babe, and then when you get older you become more independent, and then they become more dependent on you to help them with a lot of things, right? And so I feel like life is bookended like that in a lot of ways. And so this is becoming, we have a large generation that is getting older, and so this is becoming even a more and more of a thing. And there's also there's lots of other reasons why an adult might need to take care of another adult's finances for them. So yeah, this can be huge for sure.
Yeah, and this wasn't a group that I had thought about originally. And so as we were going through the notes for this episode, I'm like, oh, that just makes so much sense, especially that accountability piece.
Yeah.
Right? So, because I can see the time coming where I'm going to be taking care of probably my parents' finances, and I think I'm going to be the one who's anointed to do that.
You are the budgeting guy, right?
Exactly. Come on, Mom and Dad, I got a podcast on, for Pete's sake. But then just bringing that transparency with my two younger brothers, right? So, I've never been able to get them on YNAB. Maybe this is going to be that invitation.
That's true, yeah. But I think that's absolutely huge, because this kind of conflict happens in a family all the time, where like one sibling is handling the finances of an elderly parent, and even if nothing is going on, nothing nefarious is going on, sometimes those other siblings just might wonder because they don't have visibility into what's going on. So with YNAB Together, you could invite those siblings into that YNAB Together group, even if they don't use their own budget. I mean, hopefully, maybe they will, but even if they don't use their own budget, they'd at least have some visibility into their parents' budget that one of the siblings is managing. They could see everything that's going on, see that everything's on the up and up, and that would just really improve a lot of these family relationships as parents get older. And so that's huge. And you don't have to like share a bank login with your 5 siblings, right? Because the more you share like a bank login out, the less secure it gets. So this is a much more secure way to do it. And also I think it's going to be much more detailed. Like if you just share like a bank login, like you're going to have to go through a bunch of transactions to like see what's going on. This, you actually see it all laid out. So I think that's really, really good. You could even put notes in there describing, hey, this is why I made this expense. I didn't go out and buy a boat for myself. Mom, mom needed this, and this is what I did. So you could really have as high a level of accountability as you want with other family members, and that's huge.
Absolutely. All right. Any other thoughts here on YNAB Together, whether it's, the feature that we have in YNAB or just budgeting with close-knit people in general?
Yeah, I just say just go give it a try. I mean, even if you're like me and Ernie and you have a partner where you share logins anyway, go ahead and give it a shot, because I think it can be really powerful. It's certainly more secure to go ahead and do that, and just get used to the feature, because we are budget nerds. So go give it a shot. And even if it's not like, if some of you guys are like, well, I don't know if I need to use that feature right now. I don't have teenagers. I'm not a caregiver. Maybe you share logins with your partner anyway, or maybe you're single. And you're like, I don't really need to use it right now. Go ahead and get used to the feature, because life changes, right? And your relationships change. True. And you might have a money relationship, or a relationship with heart, and also one in which money plays a part, right? You might have that kind of relationship going forward, so it might be good to understand it.
And the last thing I'll say, I just want to plug once again the how-tos for budgeting, specifically with a partner. So if you're wondering how to set up those budgets, I'll reference again that YouTube video that Ben and I did over a year and a half ago. Then we also have a help doc. And then there's also a live workshop that we do on a very regular basis. So be sure to check out those live Q&As. And if we're doing it that month, sign up and get more of those how-tos.
Yeah, good deal. All right, Ernie, should we do some YNAB wins?
Let's do it.
What was all in your mind?
All right, I have a win here from Pai Fong. This was on the episode Ben and Ernie Tour the YNAB API. This is such a sweet one. Pai Fong says, my YNAB win. My wife and I agreed we needed to save $6,000 to purchase sperm and pay for medical bills to start our family as a queer couple. That would have covered 4 to 5 months of trying for a baby. She got pregnant on the first try. Yay. So the extra $4,800 from that fully funded category is now allocated to covering the difference between our regular income and family bonding leave. Feels great to know we are starting our family off on the right track financially. What a wonderful thing. I just, awesome. That's so great. And congratulations, Pai Fong. It's really exciting.
Yes. Congratulations. That is exciting. My win comes from Light Science. My first YNAB win is starting YNAB. I'm only 3 weeks in and already seeing the benefits. There was a lot of waste before I started, and I already have more breathing room. Yes, absolutely yes. I love the breathing room, yes. Right? That's what it's all about.
I love the punctuation there of the yes at the end. It's so good.
So YNAB, right? Like just filled with exclamation points.
Oh yeah, more exclamation points the better. So if you want to send us a win, use all the exclamation points that you can. Go ahead and send it to us. If you're watching on YouTube, you can put it in the comments below. Or if you're listening to the podcast, go ahead and send that at budgetnerds@youneedbudget.com. Cue the jingle.
Bum, bum, bum. Budget nerds.
I don't think we've had the jingle for the past couple episodes, so there you go.
I put it. I know. I've been putting.
Oh, you
it
have
in
been putting it. Okay, good.
Yep,
Good to hear.
Yep,
good to hear.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
I've just been.
We haven't like acknowledged
our voices.
We haven't like acknowledged it in a while, so the jingle's great. So, anyways, send us an email or leave a comment if you have any wins or if you have any questions. We'd be happy to get back to you. So, thanks a bunch for all that.
All right, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. I can't believe we only have maybe 1 or 2 more episodes left in 2022. So that is absolutely crazy. In fact, it might just be 1 more.
Yeah, because we'll be taking a little break around Christmas. So it's coming up. New Year's starting soon, so that's exciting.
Crazy. All right, well, we'll see you in a couple weeks, and until then, happy budgeting.
Happy budgeting.
See you, folks.
See ya.